Hi, everyone. Welcome to this episode of Compliance Deconstructed. You are joined by Jessica Zeff, the host from Simply Compliance, and Emma Howard, an attorney from Cozza Law Firm. Emma's joining us in place of Lori and Elvan on this episode. They're taking a little bit of a break. And so thank you, Emma, for joining us. This episode, we're going to talk about managed services organizations. We're going to define what they are and talk about them in the context of wellness spas or medical spas. So first things first, why are we talking about managed service organizations? It's a little bit of a departure from some of our usual topics, or it might seem that way, but actually it's not. Managed service organizations, there isn't very much information about them and their compliance obligations. So just remember, as we talk about what an MSO is, these aren't inherently risky. I don't want to give the wrong impression, but a poorly structured managed service organization is risky. So what are we talking about? A managed service organization is a non-clinical business entity that provides administrative, operational, and management support. Emma, did I get that right?
Yes, you did. Lovely job.
Okay. So they have to comply with corporate practice of medicine restrictions, fee splitting and kickback prohibitions, licensing and scope of practice laws, and state-specific healthcare ownership rules. And Emma and I were talking, and we figured there's really so little information around this. We wanted to have a podcast to explore some of the themes, some of the challenges, some of the risks. So, Emma, can I kind of turn over to you and kick off with the first question? What is an MSO? What does it look like in the context of a medical or a wellness spa? Can you talk about that a bit?
Yeah, absolutely. So before kind of diving into the structure itself, we kind of have to know why it's necessary. So in the state of Pennsylvania and some other states, there's what's called the Corporate Practice of Medicine Doctrine, which requires that any practice, any company that's offering medical services has to be owned by a licensed physician. And Pennsylvania has stricter rules around this than most other states. Some other states are a bit more lenient. They'll allow, nurse practitioners to own a medical practice or, other, medical people, but Pennsylvania is pretty strict about it. So not all, licensed physicians want to own and run and operate a medical spa. Sometimes it is nurse practitioners or other people in the medical field. So one way to kind of work with the corporate practice of medicine doctrine is to set up this MSO structure. And it's basically just like an operational structure for some kind of, practice that's offering medical services. And it's a way to allow non-licensed physicians to run and operate these practices without having the actual ownership of it. So you can still run it, it'll be yours, but we're still in compliance with Pennsylvania law.
So why is that, though? I mean, what risks was this arrangement intended to solve?
Mm-hmm. Honestly, Pennsylvania just likes to be annoying most of the time for a lot of different things, especially in the medical field. But it's
thanks, Pennsylvania. We love you anyway.
We do. We absolutely do love you anyway, but it's definitely more annoying than some of the sister states that we work with as well. But it's trying to limit, either the unauthorized practice of medicine or, having these large corporations come in and, hike up prices and all that stuff. So the intention behind it is absolutely, genuine and helpful, but it does start to cause some issues when you can't have, someone who would be licensed to provide, these medical spa services, because you don't have to be a licensed physician to provide, some of these services. You can be licensed to provide these and be a nurse practitioner or some kind of other, have some kind of other medical degree. But for the ownership piece, it does add a little bit more complexity and adds a few more layers to it.
Okay. So, I mean, when we were prepping, we didn't actually talk about this. So I don't mean to put you on the spot, But I mean, how does Pennsylvania compare to our sister states? Like, how are we more restrictive here?
Sure. So I'll take Ohio, for example. So Ohio doesn't have this. So every state has the corporate practice of medicine doctrine because you have to be able to figure out how medical practices are run, who can own them, that kind of thing. But Pennsylvania is one that requires a fully licensed physician to own the medical practice. Whereas in Ohio, you can be a nurse practitioner and own and operate a wellness spa. So you wouldn't have to have, you would still have to have, like a collaborating physician, someone who, can help teach and train and supervise, but the actual ownership of it can be owned by someone who isn't a licensed physician.
And I didn't appreciate the nuance, the difference.
Yeah.
So that's a great point, that different states will have different rules, and you need to understand that really from the outset.
Absolutely.
So could you talk a little bit more? What is this corporate practice of medicine doctrine? You've referred to it a couple of times. So can you tell us a bit more about what this thing is?
Yeah. So the corporate practice of medicine doctrine, it regulates the practice of medicine, basically. So it says it's all these different rules about, who can own a medical practice, talks about the supervision and all of that stuff. And again, like I said, each state has its own version of it. Ohio's is, hey, if you have, a lower level of, kind of medical license, then you can own and operate a practice. Whereas Pennsylvania is, you have to have the highest level. You have to be a fully licensed physician to be able to own the practice. And it gets a little tricky because it's hard to sometimes explain, what the practice of medicine is. And each state has different definitions of it. In some states, like a wellness spa wouldn't be considered the practice of medicine. You're doing medical procedures, but it's not technically the practice of medicine. Whereas Pennsylvania has a very high, or I guess, a low bar in terms of what qualifies. So that means that a licensed physician has to own the practice that's providing those services.
This is so cool. I didn't realize all of this. I mean, I know that there are different licensing requirements for each state, right? But what I didn't appreciate was that even the definition of practicing medicine could vary. Like, that's truly amazing.
It really is. It's a pain in the butt sometimes, but it is. It's very cool.
So I have so many questions. Oh my gosh, I really do mean I'm excited about this. Yeah, I nerd out. Anyone who listens to this podcast or knows me, I get very curious about these things. So I have a couple of questions. I hope I don't forget them all. Well, first of all, at least in Pennsylvania, what kind of services would require, if you're a medical spa, what kind of services would require you then to have an MSO arrangement?
So it's any kind of like invasive procedure. So medical spas typically offer, they can offer like massages and things like that. That is not considered the practice of medicine. But when you start to do any kind of like laser therapy or dermabrasion, things like that, where you're kind of entering the skin, that's usually where you start to be like right on that line of some things don't qualify, but the more invasive it is, the more needles, the more lasers, the more kind of high tech equipment that you need to use, that's typically when it falls over that line into practice of medicine.
Or IV therapy, something like that.
Yeah.
So what I'm hearing is that actually, like any other area of compliance, there can be not necessarily a gray area, but you really need to maybe get some advice.
Yeah. Oh, it's absolutely in the gray area, 100%. The Pennsylvania's come out with some more insights and things like that as to, this is the practice of medicine, this isn't, but there isn't a nice, easy, clean, like hard line rule to be like, oh, if you use X, then this is 100% the practice of medicine. It's still, kind of loosey-goosey like the law likes to be.
Yeah, no. That's why we have careers. I'm sorry, folks.
Exactly. That is why I get my paycheck.
But that's why we study what we study, and we network and we learn, so that we can, try and get through some of these gray areas. Yeah, no, that's absolutely fascinating. And I really do mean that. So why is it so important, do you think? Well, no, let me rewind. So when is the best time to start thinking about, now you don't have to have an MSO arrangement. You can employ, at least in Pennsylvania, a doctor. Is that right? To
So
oversee your operations. Is that right?
it depends. So it depends on what you're doing, right? A lawyer's favorite answer. It depends.
I know.
So let's say I am a nurse practitioner and I have been working for, a licensed physician, and we've been together for a while, and I want to go out on my own and I want to start a wellness spa or a med spa. And I want to offer things that would qualify as the practice of medicine. I've been doing all of these procedures. I know how to do them. I have the knowledge. But in the state of Pennsylvania, if me personally, if I want to own and operate a medical spa as a nurse practitioner, then I have to have this MSO structure set up. Now, if I'm a licensed physician and I, want to go out on my own and open a med spa, then I can be the owner, and that's completely fine. One thing to be aware of is all owners of the medical spa have to be licensed physicians. So if I want to partner with my husband, who's not a physician, then he wouldn't be able to be like an owner technically. So if you are a licensed physician, you don't have to have the MSO structure. But if you're not a licensed physician and you want to own or operate something that qualifies as the practice of medicine, then you would need that MSO structure.
And if you're in a part, sorry.
Go ahead. You can operate as like an independent contractor and work for other, companies and things like that. And you don't have to have an MSO structure as the nurse practitioner to be a contractor. But if you wanted to run your own practice, that's when it crosses that line into needing an MSO structure.
And so if you have two partners, but one isn't clinical, you still need to have an MSO structure. Is that right?
So it would just have to look a little differently. It could be an MSO structure. So let's say that you and I want to open up a medical spa, and you are a licensed physician, and I am not. So you will be the owner of the medical spa. And if I'm fine just being like an employee, that's totally cool. But if I want to be an owner as well, then we would set up the MSO structure, and you would be the medical director, the medical company in that MSO structure. And then I would be the service provider, the service company in that MSO structure. So the MSO structure has two companies within it. One of them is medical, and then one of them is the operational and kind of services company.
So it really does get complex. So thinking about and really understanding, even from the beginning, as you're planning out, if you're thinking about getting into the space, really thinking from the very beginning, hey, what does this structure look like? And getting some assistance to set it up really from the beginning.
Absolutely.
Don't buy your premises, don't start the company, get some advice before you do any of that, not to prevent you, not to slow you down, but to make sure you do it right, which will ultimately speed you up, right?
Exactly.
If you follow the process, you get some assistance, you do it right from the beginning, your path is going to be like many things. It's going to be a lot smoother, a lot easier down the line.
Yeah, absolutely. Okay. Absolutely correct. Yeah. Once you kind of decide that this is the path you want to go down and you're not a licensed physician, then that's absolutely when you should be thinking about, okay, how do I want this to work? Do I want to be, the operator of this whole thing? Do I kind of want to run the whole show? Or do I want to just be like an employee providing the actual services and just kind of figuring out what role you're looking for? I mean, I have had plenty of people come to me saying, hey, I'm a nurse practitioner. I already created an LLC. I want to start a med spa. What do I do? And I'm like, well, now we have to backtrack because you jump the gun a little bit. So once this idea pops into your head, that's when you should reach out to someone to kind of talk through the structure, see what works, what goals you ultimately want to accomplish and how we get there. Making sure that you don't, because you create an LLC That's awesome. That's great. But if you don't need it, or if it's the wrong type or something like that, then we have to get rid of it, and we have to get rid of all your hard work and kind of start over. So it's easier if, at the forefront, you come and kind of figure it out from there.
I think a lot of people find that tricky. They're so excited. They're going to have a
Yes.
plan. They don't know better. So
Mhm.
they start their own business and
Mhm.
then they come in and they're like, oh, this is what we need to do. Could you advise us? And that's exactly the very first hurdle, which is
Mhm.
normal. It's fantastic. Like
Yeah.
the excitement and the enthusiasm is amazing, right?
Mhm.
To make
Oh,
the
yeah.
decision to start your own wellness spa is brilliant.
Mhm.
But if you're listening and you're thinking about starting one, then think about before you ever get to the point of, even giving your business a name, maybe get
Mhm.
some help. Emma's
Yeah.
great. I promise. I've
Yeah,
worked
and
with
I
her enough.
promise, I promise I am just as excited as you are, and I'm not trying to slow you down. I'm not trying to mess you up or anything. I'm just trying to make sure it's done correctly from the forefront so that we don't have to backtrack and cost you more money and be more of a hassle and cost more time.
Absolutely. So you mentioned a medical director.
Mhm.
Could you talk about first of all, what's a medical director? What's their role in
Mhm.
this organization? Because I've heard of this medical director position before,
Mhm.
and I've had a lot of questions. But what are we talking about here? What are we doing?
Yeah, absolutely. So it might be easier if we just kind of break down the actual, because I keep saying MSO structure. What is that structure? So that structure is two entities. It's two companies. One is owned by a licensed physician or multiple licensed physicians. And then the other one is owned by a non-physician. And those are the two basic companies. So we have the first one, which is owned by the licensed physician. And that one is in this structure responsible for all medical services. So typically it's owned by the physician who's going to be overseeing, supervising, some of the procedures. And their license is going to be what's tied to the business. So it's owned by them. And then anyone offering medical services is employed through the physician owned company. So it's typically like a professional corporation, a professional LLC. That's usually what it's registered as.
Okay.
But yeah, so that is the medical piece of it. That's the medical company, all medical services going through that. And for ease of terminology, we call that the medical director, or like the medical director entity, because
Okay.
they're the ones overseeing all of the medical services that are being provided by the medical spa. And then we have the other company, which is the non-physician owned company, and that is responsible for everything else. Anything non-medical related goes through called the services company. So billing, operations, admin staff, all of that is through the non-physician owned company or the services company. So then to create this structure, we have these two companies that are created, and then we have these documents that are between the two companies that kind of establish all of the relationships. So the main document between the two is the management services agreement, and that lays out, hey, who's doing what? So we are two companies and we are partners in this medical spa that we've created. And the medical director, the the physician's company is running all of the medical services. And then the services company is doing everything else. We'll find the building, we'll, do all that different stuff. That's going to be through the medical services company. So they work together. It's just any medical service has to be offered through the physician owned company, because that's where the license is attached to. And so the name of the medical spa is going to be attached to the services company, or excuse me, the physician's company, because you have to advertise the medical services through the company that's offering them.
I'm confused.
Okay.
I'm
And that's fair.
sorry.
No, that's
So
fair.
let's walk it through, right? So if I wanted to start a medical spa, don't worry, folks, I don't, and you don't want me to. That's not my jam. So, but let's pretend, go back to, I want to open up a medical spa. Do I always own the spa? So I want to open up a medical spa, but I learned my lesson and I come to Emma and I'm like, hey, this is what I want to do, but I'm not a clinician. So
Yes.
what's going on?
Sure. So the medical director that you as a non-physician partner with is technically going to be the owner of the medical spa. But we have documents and restrictions in place so that they can't up and run off with your company. So
that's what I was worried about.
Yes.
That's kind of.
Yep. Pennsylvania requires that a licensed physician has to own the medical spa that is providing the services. So that medical director company is going to own the medical spa, and that's going to be, the company that's advertised as providing the services, all that stuff. Then the services company, who's going to be the person running the show, just not on running the actual business, is going to have a transfer restriction agreement in place with the owner of with the medical director. So the services company is going to have a restriction agreement with the medical director saying, hey, if you ever want to leave, you ever want to retire, you want to, go do something else, you don't want to run this, this medical spa anymore, you can't leave unless we say it's okay. So if you want to transfer the ownership of your company, you have to get our permission. Either you find someone or we find someone to replace you as our new physician, our new medical director. So even though you're not technically the owner of your medical spa, they can't just up and run and go without you because you're the one running everything else. They're just providing the medical services. So it's your baby, it's your, company, but because of this Pennsylvania, restriction on the ownership, we can still make sure that, you're safe and no one's going to up and run away with your business.
I did. Well, as you were talking, that was exactly, I thought, oh my God, they get to just take your business? Like who has real ownership?
Yep. There are 3 documents that are between the services company and the medical director. So that first one is that management services agreement that I talked about that lays out you're responsible for medical stuff, you're responsible for everything else. And then there's that restriction agreement saying, hey, medical director, I can't technically own this company, so I'm letting you own it. I'm giving you all of these resources. I'm paying you a commission, all this stuff. You can't leave without, you can't just up and leave with my company. So that there's that piece. And then there's a third document that kind of goes through all the healthcare compliance, the HIPAA and all of that stuff, just making sure that everything is compliant that way.
So I find this fascinating. I mean, thank you for that explanation. Mm-hmm. But you also then, if I've understood correctly, and there's a risk I haven't, but you do have a doctor, an MD, who's working for this managed services organization. Is that right? Mm-hmm. Right. But they're not just offering clinical advice and guidance, but they're offering all the administrative activities as well. To me, I'm like, is that a great use of their skills? I mean, the MD must be there for other aspects of the business. Do they offer supervision? Like, what else is going on? Why would you have an MD? Why is that so important?
So the MD is for the medical director only. So that's only required for the medical services itself, because the company, you have to have their license tied to the provision of the medical services with medical spa. So the MD is truly only responsible for providing medical services. The services company is responsible for everything else. So all the admin stuff, all the billing, all the scheduling, everything like that, that's what the services company is going to do. And that doesn't have to be owned by the MD. So this MSO structure, we've been talking a lot about, it's required for if you as a non-physician want to own a medical spa. But if you are a licensed physician and you want to own and run a medical spa, but you don't want to deal with all of the admin stuff, you just purely want to do what you love and offer medical services, and you don't want to have to worry about the billing and the client scheduling and all of that stuff, then you can set up this MSO structure as well. Even though it's not required, you can set it up so that you don't have to worry about all that. You can push that off to a third party, and then you can run your medical spa without having to run the business side of it. You can just do, the medical services piece of it.
So what's the role of the medical director?
Yeah. So the role is, the role is having a license attached to the services that you've provided, or the medical spa is providing. So a medical director offer supervision on the procedures that you're required to have supervision for. Certain laser procedures and different things like that are required to have a physician supervise, so that they would do that. And then also, of course, they have, insight into HIPAA compliance and all of that. So that's the requirement. So they have three main roles. The first is the ownership piece, because a physician has to own a company that's providing medical services. Two is the supervision for the practice of medicine. So anything that's required to have a physician supervise, the medical director would supervise that. And then three, obviously the HIPAA compliance and all of that.
Okay. So thank you. I mean, you've talked us through a lot of what this looks like and why we go through the effort, and talked about the differences across the country. I mean, just the fact that there are differences, I think is really important to understand. Mm-hmm. But the bit that you and I, often see, or that I maybe more than you, is the other side of it, where the structure hasn't been set up properly, or there's a regulatory issue, or there's a lawsuit, or whatever it is. Mm-hmm. So I'd like to talk just a little bit about that with the time that we have left. So what are some of the consequences of not setting up this organization properly?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, the biggest one is the unauthorized practice of medicine. If you don't have this structure correctly in place, and you are a non-licensed physician running a medical practice, then technically that's the unauthorized practice of medicine, depending on what you're offering. If you're offering anything that, kind of flips over into the practice of medicine, then you run that risk. So, all the consequences of that, whatever license you do have, you could lose. It's a lot of bad stuff that could happen. That's the biggest risk that I see. I mean, we've had people come to us say, hey, I set this up. I wasn't really sure if, it qualified as the practice of medicine. We kind of talked through it, realized that it did. So then we were like, all right, let's restructure everything. Let's get everything, in place, which we were able to do, which is great. But it does take a lot of logistics. And all right, well, we have to move this employee to this company because they're offering medical services. So they have to be technically under here. And we can move this one over here because they're admin, and a lot of, kind of switching around of stuff.
Yeah. Going back to that, it's easier if you set it up properly to begin with.
Yeah.
But are there financial penalties? Is there a risk of jail time? Like, what are those an
That's
issue?
A good question. Yeah, I'm actually not sure. I don't know what the penalties are. Again, they vary by state. But yeah, and obviously there's different levels of it too. But yeah, I'm not sure the exact penalties in Pennsylvania.
That's okay. So can you talk about, and I don't know if this is even an appropriate question, so we might have to frame it differently. Are there any red flags? Like if someone comes to you and they're talking to you about their organization, are there any common themes or issues or things that so someone's telling you about their wellness spa, their medical spa, they haven't necessarily registered it in the right structure, and they're talking to you about it. What are some of the indicators or red flags or things that they might say that you would think, hold up, I think you might have a problem here?
The biggest red flag is because I always ask people, what services do you plan on offering? Because there are plenty of services you can offer at a wellness spa that aren't considered the practice of medicine. So I always ask them to list all the services they're currently providing, and then any services they can possibly think of that they might want to provide in the future. Because if we're starting from square one, and they're talking through, yep, I want to do this. It's going to have massages, and we're going to have Reiki, and we're going to do this and that. And if I'm listening to those services, those don't cross into the practice of medicine. So I'm like, okay, yeah, non-licensed physician, perfectly fine. That sounds great. So I can check the box for right now, we are compliant and we don't have any issues. But then you say, all right, well, would you want to offer anything in the future? And then they start talking about Botox and different kind of injections and laser things.
Wow.
And that's when you're like, oh, well, that's great that you have those those aspirations to do that in the future. But if we don't set it up correctly now, we're going to have to restructure everything when you do want to offer those services in the future. And then you can run into the issue of, well, I already have all these like vendor contracts and client contracts. Now you have to switch things over between companies and people get confused and it can be a bit of a mess.
I can see that. Sounds like fun. Sounds like
Super
good
fun.
I'm sorry. We're not trying to offend anyone or mock anyone, but
No.
it is a challenge. It requires teamwork. So when you're helping other people and you're trying to find solutions for some of these issues, there's an element of teamwork. And
Absolutely.
as hard as it sounds, sometimes there's got to be a little bit of a sense of humor and accepting we've all gotten things, we've all gotten things a little bit wrong and have had to come back and get some help and eat crow. That's part of the human experience. And we kind of, Emma and I and Lori and Elva, we accept that. That's part of the work that we do. As long as you're you're not trying to engage in criminal activity.
If you're actively trying, then we have a lot of other issues that we need to address.
I know. So that's why we have a little bit of a laugh, not because we're, making fun of anyone, but because you really kind of have to. And there's that element of, we're there with you. We're not really laughing at you. We just understand these things come up and how they come up. And it's part of our job to get in there and help you sort it out so that you can do what you want to do.
Absolutely.
All right. So a couple of other questions that I'd like to get through. You still good, Emma?
I'm still good.
Okay. I see she's still smiling. We're good. You're a really good speaker. It's fantastic.
Thank you. I was in musical theater in high school, so I can
You were not. Are you serious?
Absolutely. I cannot sing to save my life, but I love to dance. And my mom would always laugh. She'd be like, I could always spot you on stage because you'd be smiling like right in the corner. I'm like, yeah, that's me. So.
Oh, that's superb. I didn't know that about you, but yeah. See those skill sets that you're not sure your kids are going to come out of. You're like, they're doing this for fun. Truth is, they're developing skills that they're going to have in the future.
Oh, it's absolutely. True. I went from high school, like theater kid, to tour guide in college. Now I'm an attorney and I talk for a living. So the natural progression.
That's amazing. That's so wonderful. All right. We haven't talked enough about, how we got to where where we've been and where we are. So next coffee chat, that's on the agenda.
I'll show you all my playbills and everything. It'll be great.
Oh, I think that's really cool. See, she thinks I'm kidding, folks. I'm actually not. I really am like this.
Well, you think I'm kidding that I have a binder of playbills. I actually do. They're at my mom's house.
Oh my God.
She kept all of them.
Oh. See, your mom, I do the same thing. Like I have a box. I have 3 kids. I have a box. Well, they're now multiple boxes. And each one has the kid's name on it. And I've kept, all of their like school products or their, when they participated in chorus or whatever it was. And I've kept it all.
Yeah. So and one day they'll talk about it on a podcast.
I know. I'm sorry, boys. I just probably embarrass them forever. All right. We'll get to the topic of MSOs again. All right. So something that, we see, both of us see, is actually people start off with the right intent. Okay. But they drift over time. And there are many reasons for that. They cross lines somewhere. So when we're thinking about medical spas and an MSO arrangement, is there a line or where is the line between permissible administrative support and impermissible control over clinical decision making?
That's a great question. And it's, for me, we lay it out in the contract. So in all the agreements that are between the services company and the medical director's company, we lay out that line. We say anything that has to do with, medical services, that's the medical director. Anything that has to do with, admin, that is the services company. But, it's one thing to have it laid out, black and white on a contract. And then, but what does that look like in practice? And it's so much trickier because the real world is trickier. So the best rule of thumb is, and I hate to keep using medical services, but that's, that's kind of really the only kind of rule, thing we can kind of go off of. So if it has anything to do with giving, like medical advice or performing like a medical procedure, that should only be handled by the licensed physician.
Okay.
And if you're ready, I'm about to make it even trickier for you.
Oh,
So,
God.
so of course, the licensed physician has to own the medical director company, and a non-licensed physician owns the services company. But if the owner of the services company is, a nurse practitioner who has been performing all of these procedures, for most of their career, then they're going to want to be the ones that are, working and, working with the clients, working with their patients, obviously. So kind of the most typical thing we see is, all right, we have a licensed physician who sets up the medical director entity, and we have the whole structure set up. And then we have the nurse practitioner who sets up the services company and runs all the billing and admin and all that stuff. But then we have the nurse practitioner who also wants to offer medical services to the patients. So what we do is we have to have like an employment contract between the owner of the services company and the medical director company, so that the owner, the boss, the person running this med spa, can actually provide medical services. So that so it there are a lot of strings, and we're tangling them and moving them around, and so that's kind of how we also kind of have to make it super laid out in black and white. So we have the nurse practitioner who can provide medical services under the supervision of a physician. They don't really have a clear line, because they're like, well, I'm going to be doing all the billing, I'm doing all this admin stuff, I'm doing all the client scheduling, but I'm also providing the majority of the medical services because I am trained to do that and I can. So on paper it's going to seem very black and white. Everything that has to do with medicine, that's going to be by the medical director. Anything else is the service company. But in reality, it's going to be quite blurred, because the nurse practitioner, owner of the services company, is providing services to clients. So it definitely gets fuzzy when you're in practice, and it's I'm just gonna keep making it fuzzier and fuzzier.
But it's like that. I mean, rules and regulations and the law can be fuzzy.
Mm-hmm.
Again, we come back to, that's why we spend so much time studying them and studying case law and studying enforcement, so that we can help guide, right? So we've only got a few more minutes, and a big question for me, and I don't know if it's a concern for you in this context, but in the work that I normally do, things like kickbacks and fee arrangements and bribery in my space, my everyday work, these are big issues. And I wondered, how should MSO fees be structured to avoid kickbacks or bribes or fee splitting or inducement concerns? Does that make sense in this context? I don't know if it even applies.
Yeah, no, I mean, that's a great question. Typically, how we structure it is, so the medical director is the one providing all the services to the clients. So once, and for med spas, insurance typically doesn't apply, because a lot of insurance won't cover the services being provided by med spas. So that obviously adds a layer to it as well. Typically what we'll do is, since the services company is responsible for all the admin stuff, we'll just have any kind of billing go straight through the services company. So the billing and all that stuff doesn't go through the medical director. And then the medical director will get paid. I mean, we've seen it structured a bunch of different ways. Usually it's a percentage, of the a percentage of the collections, because to be paid for their services and all of that. And they get paid for a couple different things. They get paid for like the management of the director fee, but then they also get paid for the medical services they provide. So we absolutely defer to like the compliance experts, refer to you, Jessica, and all of that, to make sure that we're not violating any kickback laws or things like that, because it obviously does, it still is a factor, but we don't have, like, we defer to you guys to kind of confirm our structures and all of that.
Okay. Well, are there any revenue sharing arrangements that that concern you in terms of this kind of arrangement?
Not that I've seen,
Okay.
which is great. You know, you love to hear that. I'm sure there are some out there that exist that would get a little iffy, but personally, none that I've seen.
Okay. Yeah, I'm sure you're devastated by that. I see you shedding tears.
I know,
You're
right? Oh man, I don't get to go into the anti-kickback laws. Yeah, yeah.
No, but that's I mean, that's a good thing. That's okay. All right. Is there anything that we haven't talked about, that anything major that we haven't covered that you'd like our audience to know about this MSO structure?
It sounds complicated. It sounds like a mess, but I promise when you're actually in it and you're actually running it and operating it, it's not going to be any different than any other business. We have to have the complexity, and we have to have the kind of black and white lines in all the documents and all of that. But as we were kind of talking about, whenever it's in practice, it's not going to seem as red taped and restrictive, because once it's flowing, it's flowing. So it sounds like it's going to be all these roadblocks and things like that. And there are things to be aware of, but that's why whenever we're setting up these MSO structures, we're working with your accountants, your, whoever runs your payroll. We're working with all of these people who are on your team to make sure that it does flow easily and consistently, and to make sure we don't run into any issues, because the last thing I want to do is overcomplicate your life. Medical services and medical wellness spas, I could never, do what they do. So I don't want to overcomplicate their lives or anything like that. I want to make it as simple and easy as possible while remaining compliant legally. So I promise, once you're actually running it, it's not going to be as scary and daunting as it sounds.
Yeah, no, you and I have a very similar, if not the same, philosophy and approach in that regard. We're doing this for exactly the same reasons. We're interested in helping folks get to where they want to go in the most effective, efficient way, but also protecting them to the extent that we can, or helping them protect themselves to the extent that we can. I know we don't have Wonder Woman, stapled on our foreheads or anything, but we try. Or Superwoman. I'm not sure. Is there a Superwoman? I don't know why I said that.
Supergirl, and they're coming out with a movie about Supergirl, but I don't know if there's a Superwoman.
Okay, we'll stick with Wonder Woman. Do you know Wonder Woman and the Hulk are the first two characters I ever remember from my childhood?
Really?
Wonder Woman. I forget what her name was, but yeah, I'm old. No, I'm kidding. I'm not. All right. We will finish on that note, because otherwise Emma and I might start on a very different trajectory. And compliance related it'll be. But Emma, thank you so much. We're winding down. Emma, thank you so much for being on the podcast. You were absolutely fantastic. I've learned so much, and I hope our listeners learn a lot as well. And hopefully we'll have another podcast date another time.
Yes, absolutely. Thank you so much for having me. I really appreciate it. I've had a blast.
Oh, superb. All right, guys. Thank you for listening in, and we will see you next time. All right. Take care.